The wind, an ancient and ceaseless presence in the Dutch polder, had always been Koen van Dijk's most reliable confidant. It whispered tales of seasons passed through the rushes, carried the scent of rich, damp earth, and dried the laundry on the line with an efficiency no machine could match. But lately the wind felt different. More erratic. The gentle breezes that once coaxed his tulips to bloom now often escalated into gusts that threatened to uproot them. The winters were milder, the summers fiercer, and the predictable rhythms of farming, a legacy passed down through generations of Van Dijks, were being thrown into disarray. Koen, a man whose features were etched with the wisdom of the sun and the resilience of his ancestors, stood in his fields one blustery spring morning, his gaze sweeping over the vast, flat expanse of the polder. His traditional farmhouse, stoic and red-bricked, had stood here for centuries, a monument to continuity. But continuity, Koen was beginning to admit, was becoming a luxury he could no longer afford. The rising cost of diesel for his tractors, the exorbitant electricity bills for his milking parlor and greenhouses, and the unpredictable yields due to the changing climate were slowly chipping away at the foundations of his livelihood. His children, grown and moved to the city, called with well-meaning advice about diversifying, about modernizing. Koen, though, was a man of the earth, his hands preferring the feel of soil to the cold touch of a keyboard. Yet, the gnawing anxiety in his gut was a new sensation, one that even a lifetime of hard work couldn't banish. His neighbor and lifelong friend Aaron, a man as equally steeped in tradition, but perhaps a touch more vocal in his complaints, often joined Koen for a cup of strong coffee in the evenings. "The old ways are dying, Koen," Aaron would lament, stirring sugar into his cup with a heavy hand. "The government, the weather, the prices, it's all conspiring against us. Soon, these fields will be barren, or worse, covered in concrete." Koen would merely grunt, but Aaron's words echoed his own deepening fears. He loved this land with a fierce, quiet passion. It wasn't just soil to him. It was history, identity, and the very breath in his lungs. To see it falter, to see his way of life threatened, was a pain he couldn't articulate. He had to find a way. Not just for himself, but for the polder, for the community that had relied on reliable harvests and stable livelihoods for so long. One particularly frustrating afternoon, after a power outage had cost him a day's milking, Koen, driven by a rare burst of internet research, stumbled upon an article about distributed renewable energy. It spoke of small-scale wind turbines, solar arrays, and energy independence. He scoffed initially. Wind turbines? Those monstrous giants that dotted the distant horizon, symbols of corporate power, not meant for a simple farmer like him. But as he read on, something began to shift. The article spoke of farmers in Germany and Denmark, not so different from himself, who had turned the very wind that buffeted their fields into a source of income, a shield against rising costs. He spent weeks consumed by it, poring over schematics, financial projections, and environmental reports. He learned about kWp and kilowatt hour, about grid connections and guaranteed feed-in tariffs. The language was alien, intimidating, but the promise was a beacon. The very wind that had become a fickle mistress could be tamed, harnessed, turned into a steadfast ally. The idea, once a hesitant whisper in his mind, began to grow into a determined roar. He would plant a wind turbine. Not a gargantuan industrial one, but a modest farm-scale turbine, one that would stand as tall and proud as the ancient windmills of his ancestors, humming a new song of self-sufficiency. When Koen finally broached the subject with Aaron, his friend nearly choked on his coffee. "A wind turbine, Koen? Have you lost your mind? The permits alone will bury you. And the cost. You'll be selling your prized livestock to pay for that metal monster." Koen fixed Aaron with a quiet, resolute gaze. "The cost of doing nothing, Aaron, will be far greater. My children will not inherit a failing farm. This polder will not become barren on my watch." Aaron, seeing the unshakable conviction in Koen's eyes, merely shook his head, a troubled frown on his face. He knew Koen. Once that glint appeared in his eyes, there was no deterring him. The journey was indeed fraught with obstacles, just as Aaron had predicted. The local council, a sprawling bureaucracy of forms and committees, seemed bewildered by Koen's ambition. A private wind turbine for a farm, Mr. Van Dyke? Most unusual. And the aesthetics? The noise? What will the neighbors say? It was then that Evan, a young, earnest council member Koen rarely saw outside of election campaigns, stepped forward. Evan, fresh out of university with a degree in environmental science, had been pushing for green initiatives for years, often to the polite but firm resistance of his older colleagues. He saw in Koen's proposal not just an individual's ambition, but a potential blueprint for the entire community. Mr. Van Dyke's project aligns perfectly with our sustainability goals, Evan argued passionately at a council meeting, brandishing an economic impact report he'd hastily prepared. It's a step towards energy independence, a reduction in our carbon footprint. And frankly, it's about supporting our local farmers in adapting to a changing world. Evan became Koen's unlikely champion, guiding him through the labyrinthine application process, helping him decipher technical jargon, and even attending community outreach meetings where Koen, usually a man of few words, had to articulate his vision to a confused and often skeptical audience. The community reaction was a mixed bag. Some, mostly younger families, were intrigued, their children drawing sketches of the sleek white turbine. Others, particularly the older generation, saw it as an affront to tradition, a blight on the scenic landscape. "He's ruining the view," someone complained at a town meeting. "Next thing you know, the whole polder will be covered in them." Aaron, sitting in the back, silently nodded his agreement. But Koen, with Evan's steady support, pressed on. He secured a loan, mortgaging a portion of his land, a gamble that sent shivers down his spine but solidified his resolve. Then came the day the components arrived. Giant trucks rumbled through the narrow polder roads, carrying the segmented tower, the graceful blades, and the generator housing. It was a spectacle that drew onlookers from miles around. Over several dramatic days, a colossal crane, dwarfing Koen's farmhouse, painstakingly lifted each section into place. The final blade assembly was a breathtaking ballet of precision and power. As the last blade clicked into position, a collective gasp went through the small crowd. There it stood. Tall, elegant, its stark modernity a stark contrast to the ancient polder, yet somehow perfectly at home against the vast Dutch sky. The day the turbine spun for the first time, a gentle hum filling the air, was a moment of quiet triumph for Koen. The anemometer measured the wind speed, the generator whirred to life, and electricity flowed onto his farm, displacing the expensive grid power. He watched the digital display, the numbers climbing steadily, a tangible representation of his newfound independence. He ran his hand over the smooth, cool metal of the turbine base, a profound sense of accomplishment washing over him. The wind, his old confidant, was now his diligent, tireless employee. The immediate benefits were undeniable. Koen's energy bills plummeted. He was even selling excess power back to the grid, transforming a painful expense into a steady, albeit modest, income stream. His farm, once teetering on the edge, began to thrive with renewed vigor. His milking parlor ran efficiently, his greenhouses maintained optimal temperatures, all powered by the free, clean energy of the polder wind. Aaron, initially a staunch skeptic, could not ignore the evidence. He'd seen the turbine go up, seen it spin, and now, when he came for coffee, he'd ask increasingly pointed questions about Koen's energy statements. "So, you're telling me, you're making money from this thing?" he'd ask, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning fascination. "Enough to buy my own coffee, Aaron," Koen would reply with a rare smile. The shift in Aaron was gradual but inexorable. He witnessed Koen's stability, the quiet confidence that had replaced his earlier anxieties. He saw Koen's cows happily grazing beneath the turbine's graceful sweep, unaffected by its presence. He heard the surprisingly gentle hum, not the deafening roar some had predicted. Koen, never one for grand gestures, became an accidental ambassador. Farmers and villagers, once critical or curious, started approaching him with genuine questions. He would patiently explain the technology, the financing, the challenges he overcame. He opened his farm for an informal, open turbine day, where Evan helped him set up information boards and answer technical queries. It was during one of these open days that Evan, ever the visionary, proposed an ambitious idea. "Kuhn, this isn't just about your farm anymore. This is about the polder. What if we could do this for the whole town? Imagine, a green polder. Energy independent, sustainable, a model for our region." Kuhn, though still primarily focused on his farm, found himself captivated by Evan's passion. He saw the flicker of hope in the eyes of his neighbors, the same hope that had driven him. "How do we even begin?" he asked. "One rooftop at a time," Evan declared. "One community project at a time." Evan, with Kuhn's quiet backing, launched the Green Polder Initiative. He held public workshops, educating residents about solar power, insulation, and energy-efficient appliances. Kuhn, now a local celebrity of sorts, would share his personal story, his down-to-earth honesty resonating more deeply than any politician's speech. Aaron, now a fully converted advocate, surprised everyone by becoming one of the initiative's most vocal supporters. He convinced two of his own nephews, struggling young farmers, to install solar panels on their barn roofs. "Kuhn's proven it, lads," Aaron would boom. "The future ain't in fossil fuels. It's in the wind and the sun above our heads." The transformation was slow, requiring immense patience and persistent effort, but it was undeniable. One rooftop at a time, then two, then a dozen, glistened with solar panels. A local cooperative, inspired by Kuhn's turbine, began feasibility studies for a community-owned wind project, aiming to install two larger turbines on shared land, with profits benefiting all members. Businesses in the town center started switching to LED lighting and investing in better insulation, spurred by the promise of long-term savings and a cleaner image. The polder, always a landscape of quiet beauty, began to hum with a new kind of energy. The visible changes were subtle at first. A glint of photovoltaic cells here, a new, efficient heat pump there, but they soon added up to a palpable shift in the town's collective consciousness. The air felt cleaner, the sense of community ownership stronger. The local economy, once stagnant, found new life in the burgeoning green sector, creating jobs for installers, technicians, and educators. Years passed. Kuhn van Dyke, his hair now silvered, still tended his fields, his hands still caked with rich polder soil. His turbine, gracefully turning against the vast sky, had become an iconic landmark, a symbol of resilience and vision. His farm was more prosperous than ever, a testament to sustainable agriculture. Aaron, though still prone to the occasional grumble about the weather, now channeled his energy into chairing the local Green Polder Cooperative, advising local businesses on sustainable practices. He often pointed to Kuhn's turbine, a proud glint in his eye. "That," he'd tell newcomers, "is where it all began. With one stubborn farmer who loved his land more than he loved his old habits." Evan, now a respected leader in regional environmental policy, frequently brought delegations to the polder, showcasing it as a prime example of grassroots, community-driven green transition. He always made sure Kuhn was there to shake hands, to tell his story in his quiet, unassuming way. The polder, once threatened by the changing climate and economic uncertainty, had not just adapted, it had thrived. It was a place where tradition met innovation, where the ancient rhythms of farming danced in harmony with the gentle hum of renewable energy. Kuhn van Dyke, the quiet farmer who loved his land, had not merely planted a wind turbine. He had planted a seed of hope and watched it grow into a verdant, vibrant forest of change, carried aloft by the tireless wind of the polder. That will be all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button. Goodbye.